Hello, friends. We are in a troubling time when it comes to misinformation. The views of our guests do not reflect that of my own. This show is for entertainment purposes only, and any information presented during this show is a live-action role-play scenario. All that being said, enjoy this episode.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts, you have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Tim Kelly. First, a couple of announcements. Check out Brainsupreme if you're ready to start your microdosing journey with the highest quality ingredients available. Visit their website using the link in the description and you'll get 15% off your entire order. Also, check out our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite content creators there. Also, watch the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana. It's available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. We're booking guests for March. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today, I want to welcome back to the show Tim Kelly. He is founder of Polytope Press and author of Natural Healing, Self-Empowerment, Optiflex Hidden History of Humanity, and multiple novels. His company is focused on actualizing every aspect of an optimal civilization. Tim, welcome back. How you doing?
I am always learning. How about yourself?
Same here, man, and it's great to have you back. I enjoyed our previous discussions. Before, we covered your research into our hidden history and the human and possible non-human hierarchy that has always held power and attempted to maintain power and control, really ever since documented history, and most likely long before that. As well as we also talked about some ancient healing modalities and medicine. And today, you're going to share your 6-part plan to defeat the Cabal called Opt Out and Optimally Out Design. And this is something, like I told you before, I think everyone listening can get behind this. Before we get into this, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and let them know where they can find your work.
Okay, well, I began my career as a writer. From the time I was a very little kid, I loved writing and did well in school, won several awards. And then after I left school, I had a number of accomplishments, which do include the creation of a 3D periodic table of the elements, a new theory of the origins of species, and a wide variety of innovations in technology, some of which we'll be talking a little bit about today. And of course, doing a great deal of writing, including more than 20 different pieces of writing. And some of the books that are included would be Natural Healing, Self-Empowerment, The Math Wizard, Hidden History of Humanity, and several other books that may be mentioned in the course of today's podcast.
Excellent. Great introduction. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get too deep into your plan, thoughts on some recent events and where we're headed collectively, how you see things unfolding based on the portrayal from the media and the ruling class of where we're headed versus where we actually are. What are your thoughts on our current state here?
So I know there's been a lot of talk about Trump's reference to a golden age. I've also seen a number of rebels make reference to the golden age being the golden age of Saturn, which is somewhat interesting because that goes back to ancient times. As I mentioned in Hidden History of Humanity, the references to Saturn are often references to Kronos, which are often references to the Anunnaki and El. This gets back to a whole different set of concepts from ancient times up to the present. But when you look at the actions, and the actions do speak louder than words, we see a strong surge towards artificial intelligence, and we also see an unrelenting move in the direction of weather warfare. So these two elements combined, let me just pause here for a second and ask you, have you done podcasts on the fog?
I have not. I've heard a lot about it. I've talked to a few people, heard some theories, but I've never really covered it yet.
Okay, so with events like the fog occurring, we do have a very sinister situation developing here that we have to be aware of what this agenda is, which is to move in the direction of what is called synth bio. So apparently, Maria Z was doing a show on synth bio and said that when she types synth bio, Google recognizes it as a phrase already, even though this is a relatively new concept. This is synthetic biology, the merging of machines and biology to create a new species. Some have referred to that species as Homo borgenesis. Some people say that this is inevitable, that there's nothing that we can do to stop it, but there actually are a great many things that we can do to stop it. When I hear people say things like, well, I'm not sure. Just let me use a ridiculous example. Sooner or later, everyone's going to have to cut their hands off, so we might as well just cut them off now. Well, no, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So to say that it's inevitable that AI takes over everything, no, it's not inevitable. I mean, we can stop it. We can draw lines to where AI is acceptable and where it's not acceptable. Like, for example, I do not think AI should be running hospitals. I do not think
Right.
that AI should be determining what is true and what is not true. And I don't think that you should have lethal weapons in the hands of AI.
100%. I want to go back to the fog for a second. How does that correlate with this synthetic biological agenda that you were just discussing?
Okay, so they've had plans for many decades for how to introduce synth bio. So if you go the route that was experimented with during the scamdemic, which was to try to create a scare to get you to go into a hospital to get an injection, that's very effective because it's being injected. A payload is being injected directly into your bloodstream. That's a very effective way of getting something inside you. But what they saw a little bit more reluctance on the part of the general public than they were expecting. So what are the other vectors for getting synth bio into your system? Well, how about you just drop it on people so that they are forced to deal with it? And the reports have come in from pretty much all over the world. We have farmers who are talking about their pets dropping dead as they're breathing in the fog.
Wow.
Zooming into it, you can see particulates that are in
Yeah.
there and what all are in these particulates. We're finding that there are elements of nanotech, there are parasites, there are bacteria. They can put in the elements of synth bio, and we can inhale that and ingest that and start involuntarily becoming something that we don't want to be.
One more thing about some of the recent events, your thoughts on the drones and quote unquote UAP activity.
Okay, so this is all part of the exact same thing. So
Mhm.
there's a wide variety of things going on with that. So some of it, always interesting when you have the government saying there's nothing to be concerned about here, even though these things have been everywhere. And then there are other people who are trying to say, oh no, this is perfectly normal. And other people are trying to dismiss it, saying, oh no, those are just regular planes. You don't understand what you're seeing. Well, clearly none of that was been true. So there have been correlations between droppings of the fog with drones. So some of the drones are actually releasing the fog. So we do know that. And then we've also had some strange reports of heat elements. This is like, I don't know, low grade thermite that is being dropped on different places. Now, if you look at what happened with LA, I mean, I don't know how you could look at that footage and think any of that was even remotely natural.
Mhm.
If you see the drones actually that were going over the area to review the wreckage after it was done, the homes are flattened and the trees are fine. So, I mean, what in the world could be going on there? At Dane Wigington's Geoengineering Watch website, he talks about an incident where it was caught on tape that a home was catching fire from inside the home, not outside. So we do know that you can send EMPs to smart meters and they will spark and they will catch fire. So some of that is going to be directed energy weapons that are igniting different forms of technology. Of course, we've seen the horrors of lithium batteries in the electric vehicles that can catch fire. So you can pulse those things and you can start triggering fires that way. And of course, if you have drones with EMPs, they can do a wide variety of things and they can be part of the weather warfare and manipulation. Like a lot of people were talking about the Santa Ana winds. Is it exactly the Santa Ana winds, or are these wind gradients that are being enhanced by drones? So there can be a wide variety of things involved, including Chinese spying, which some people have said could be Russian spying, could be any number of things. But We also know that the technology does exist to knock these things out of the sky. I mean, I've seen the footage of the tests that have been done to knock drones out of the air. So they could knock them out of the sky, but they just seem to have no interest in doing that. So I do think that there's a multitude of agendas. Not all the drones are the same. I don't know about that recent report that I heard of someone saying that they saw an orb morphing into a physical drone. I have no idea about that.
I've heard this too, yeah.
Okay, so someone said that. But in any case, I would not like to see the sky filled with drones on countless missions. I don't think that that's the healthiest way to go.
No, that reminds me of all the dystopian movies that Hollywood has portrayed where drones police the sky and can take you out in an instant if you quote unquote break the law or are disobedient in any way. So you never want to see that. That's never a good thing. It seems like it's definitely time for us to start implementing things to at the least check out of some of these systems. And I've done shows about this before. And I'm really looking forward to what you have in store with your 6-part plan. Some of the things discussed here range from the simplest of things, just not participating with anti-human agendas. Don't keep feeding the machine. Don't vote for these parasitic lizard people. Don't keep poisoning yourself with the poison they offer, and try and be as self-sufficient as possible. Those are some of the few simple things that we can do, but I'm sure there's many different levels to be explored, and I'm definitely interested in hearing what you've come up with.
So I think you start at the beginning by understanding the nature of your enemy. And I think when we understand them, they're not really bullies as much as they are parasites. So that's a very important insight. They need us. We do not need them. Okay. They're not going to survive if we are gone. That's why their plans always talk about 500 million people left, because if they wiped out all of us, then they would have to do work, and they don't want to do any work. So they are fundamentally parasites. So how do you get rid of parasites? I think that nature itself has taught us the ultimate strategy for getting rid of parasites. Don't be a host that is suitable to a parasite. So this applies on multiple levels. As an individual, this applies to health, where if you create the right terrain inside your body, you will not be host to parasites because parasites won't want to attach to you. And then you go beyond that to a community, where if your community as a whole has integrity, working with nature as opposed to against it, then the parasites want nothing to do with you. We've talked about and several people have talked about the spiritual aspects of this, how sadness, anger, fear are emotional states that negative entities can feed off of. Well, obviously, if you're an incredibly positive person, then you're not giving off any energy for a spiritual parasite to attach to. So we want to stop these parasites. Now, when you think about warfare, there are two classic ways of going about warfare. The first is combat or violence, and that's the part that most people are familiar with. But there is a second method of warfare, one that is actually more effective than combat or violence. And what is that? Cutting the supply lines. If you can cut the supply lines of your enemy, they have no way to replenish themselves, they starve, and they lose the will to fight. So this is what this strategy is largely going to be about, cutting the supply lines by opting out. And then we want to pursue a strategy of optimally out-designing. When I was a kid, I remember thinking about a lot of reforms as a teenager that I might want to implement. And an older guy said to me, you should work within the system. And then eventually I realized that the system was a conveyor belt to an incinerator. So if you work inside that system, you burn. That's all that it is. Yeah. So you want to adopt the strategy that was suggested by R. Buckminster Fuller. What he said was, don't fight the system. Design a new system that makes the old one obsolete. So this is what we'll be talking about. So let's begin with point number 1, which is Big Pharma. So how do we cripple Big Pharma? We opt out. Okay, so we stop going for drugs. We stop going for insurance. I heard Maria Z recently was saying something along the lines of, oh, well, if they come up with this new AI cancer vax, they may do something along the lines of, if you do not cooperate with that, you may get your insurance yanked. Well, I'm telling you, as a human being right now, I have never had any form of insurance. My education is my insurance. Okay, that's my expression on that. Education is the ultimate form of insurance. So with that, if we turn away from drugs, how do we optimally out-design that situation? Well, my answer to that is my book, Natural Healing Self-Empowerment. So I'm going to revisit that in relation to some of the topics that we discussed before. Sure. Not only do I believe that you can wipe out the majority, let's say 99% of disease, but I do believe that human regeneration is possible. And during the last several months, I have found that there are ways to make the regeneration go even faster because of just recent experiments that I did. So I stand by everything that I said before. You can regenerate hair, you can regenerate teeth, you can even heal internal wounds that most people think cannot be healed with nutrition. So I'm going to flow a little bit on this particular topic just to
Yeah.
help people out a little bit more. So let's talk about how would you heal something internally that they say that you can't heal internally. So I know when I was reading, for example, Dr. Jensen's Guide to Better Bowel Care, he talked about the obstructions in the bowel, how important it was to keep the bowel clear. And a lot of people would find that their bowels were obstructed and there seemed to be no way out except for surgery. So they would carve somebody up and carve out the part of the intestines that was blocked and then repatch what was left back together. So now somebody has a shorter intestines. But what else could you do? You could do a colon cleanse. Okay. And then you flush all of that garbage out and you don't have to go through surgery. Liver. Over the years, I can't tell you how many people I've had to interact with who had an obstructed gallbladder or obstructed
Huh.
liver bile ducts. And
I have to
now,
stop you. This is my story. Whenever I was 25 or 26, didn't know anything about anything, thought the doctors and surgeons always knew best. My surgeon suggested that I get my gallbladder removed because it was only going to be downhill from there. What I know now is I had a little bit of what they call sand and sludge in my gallbladder that could have
yep.
easily been flushed out just by a change in my diet, but never once was that mentioned. It was portrayed as if I don't get this surgery, I'm basically going to die soon or have a horrible life. And it caused more complications and problems after than it ever did before. So, this is a perfect example of how they deceive you to get you sucked into some of these surgeries and medical procedures.
And did that surgery cost you $5, Chris?
Oh, goodness. I was still in debt for a long time for that until very recently.
So the gall bladder can be cleansed as well as the liver itself through a liver cleanse procedure, which is described in my book. There's a link to doing that on the web. It's cost effective. You go to the grocery store, you get the items that you need, you flush this stuff out. So my colleagues had run into a woman who was running a storage facility and she was about to go in for surgery. And they said, "Hey, have you heard about the liver cleanse procedure?" She said, "No, I haven't heard anything about that." So she did the liver cleanse procedure, surgery avoided. She's perfectly okay, perfectly fine. It's worked in hundreds, if not thousands of cases. So kidney stones, so whatever the procedures are for the hospital for kidney stones, those two can be removed as well. Now, ulcers are, of course, a internal tear that leads to bleeding that can also be very dangerous if not healed, but nutrition can heal those as well. And I am in the process of determining whether or not certain other major internal injuries can also be healed simply through nutrition. Now, I want to talk a little bit about methodology for how things work and why I'm able to get some of the results that some other people can't in terms of regeneration of, let's say, hair and teeth and internal tissues and stuff like that. Because I'm sure people are curious, like, why is this guy succeeding where other people are failing? Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, so the strength of science is, in many cases, its weakness, which is the scientific method, which many of us are familiar with. You create a hypothesis, you design an experiment to test that hypothesis. The experiment is usually intended to isolate one variable. You evaluate the results and see whether they confirm or deny the hypothesis. The thing I want to focus on, however, is the isolate for the one variable. So let's talk as an example about selenium for a second. So selenium is a trace mineral. Trace minerals are defined as being needed by the body less than 100 milligrams a day. There are 7 major minerals that are needed, and those minerals are defined by dosages needed at more than 100 milligrams a day. So with selenium, if you go to the store and you hear about selenium, okay, let me just mention why you might hear about selenium. Some people might not have ever heard this one before. So 2 major diseases that exist in the world that supposedly have no cure are cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy. So now I talk about all diseases are being capable of being cured. So what, do you mean cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy can be cured too? Yes, yes. Dr. Wallach did that decades ago. And he showed that it was usually a selenium deficiency that caused that. So when he showed that to his superior, he was fired from his job. And eventually they tried to get that information to Jerry Lewis, the Jerry's kids, always having a marathon, trying to come up with a cure. But here was the cure. And they buried it instead of celebrating it, which is, not the greatest thing in the world. So anyway, here you have selenium. And so people start doing some tests and experiments with selenium. So one of the things that happens is a study is done, and a bunch of men are on 200 micrograms of selenium for a very long period of time, and they see a lot of health benefits. So what happens now that you've heard this information? Maybe you take a glance at a reference that I have, Bolsh and Bolsh's Prescription for Nutritional Healing. You read in there, oh, selenium is so plentiful in the food supply, you're not going to have a problem. And you go to the store and you get your bottle, and your bottle has 200 micrograms of selenium. Now, at this point, everyone feels safe. Why do they feel safe? Well, because it's unlikely that you're going to overdose on this stuff, and it's plentiful in the food supply. You only need 200 micrograms. Studies have been done, and this is the dose that's available in the store. Now, what happens there is everyone feels safe, but everyone else also feels complacent. And that is why I succeed where others fail, is because I am not complacent. I look at that dosage of 200 micrograms and I say, are you sure? Are you 100% sure that that is the correct dosage? So some years go by, and there was an incident several years ago where there was a mother of a child whose spine was kind of locked up. Spine was just really not that flexible. So a colleague of mine calls me up and says, hey, what would you recommend for this particular case? And I said, well, never dealt with anything like this before, so let me do some digging and get back to you. So I do some digging, and I find a doctor who has developed a protocol to unlock spines just like this situation. So what was the protocol that that doctor had discovered on his own? It called for selenium mixed with copper to unlock spines. Now, that made a lot of sense to me, but here's the thing that was amazing. The dosage of selenium he recommended, 15 times the recommended dose. 15 times 200 micrograms. Now, if that doctor had been as complacent as everybody else, he never would have found that out, and he never would have healed all of those people. So this is the point that I'm making. There are a lot of people out there who are complacent. A study was done. Okay, that's great that a study was done, but did it get us to the point where we have the results that we want? If not, maybe you need to do more digging. And that's what I did. I did more digging until I found the answers that worked. So in relation to a lot of these protocols then in isolating for one variable, here's the thing about real life. You can keep isolating for one variable and pat yourself on the back when you do that. But when it comes to regeneration, like for example, regeneration of the hair, most of that has to do with the health of the prostate. Okay. So now let's say you want to make a healthy prostate. Are you going to do that with one nutrient? No. Unfortunately, in life, it takes several nutrients to make the prostate healthy. And that's my point. So some people might say, okay, wait a minute, though. If you have this regeneration, can't they just do a study to verify what you're saying? I wish they would. But from the nature of science, again, is to isolate for one variable. It's not going to isolate. How many people are going to isolate for 90 variables or something like that? Or just, forget the isolation altogether. And if people want to know, where does this ultimately lead us? It leads us pretty much to the conclusion that Wallach came to on his own, which is you don't need one nutrient. You don't need 5. You don't need 10. You need 90. 90. You need 90 nutrients, and they all have to be in the right forms and the right amounts. I understand that. I describe that as simply as I can possibly describe it in my work. And if you do that, you will see the regeneration that I'm referring to, which, again, from my perspective, this is like the most powerful health book ever written. So my attempt to optimally outdesign Big Pharma, natural healing, self-empowerment, that's my solution for part 1. Any questions before I go on to part 2?
You said we need 90 of these supplements. Are these relatively easy to get our hands on?
They are if you know what you're doing. So the majority of them, for example, in Dr. Wallach's formula, you can just look up 90 nutrients, Dr. Wallach, Wallach, and he'll list what those nutrients are in rough form, but 60 of them are minerals. So now people might say, well, wait a minute, that's a lot of them right there. So I have to get 60 different supplements? No. You can get most of those minerals ready to go in humic or fulvic minerals. These are organic, plant-derived colloidal minerals. They don't taste too good if you take them just in water, but you can add them to like fruit juice or something like that, and then they're tasteless. So there's like 60 nutrients at once. But I do think you have to be aware of what you're doing when it comes to the major minerals, what form those are in, what amounts those are needed in, and some of the more prominent of the trace minerals. There's a lot of subtleties with that. And then with vitamins, there's also dosages that I'm finding you have to be aware of. Like some of the dosages increase as you get older. If you haven't been paying attention to what you were doing, you're going to need larger amounts of certain vitamins than when you were younger because you've just become depleted over time if you haven't been living in harmony with nature that whole time.
And something I believe you mentioned in a previous episode that we have the ability, if we have the correct nutrients, to regrow teeth. Is that right?
Correct. That is definitely correct.
Excellent. And this would be in your book as well, and some of those supplements are included for that as well, right?
Well, teeth are very important because they tie into the meridians, and the health of your heart, for example, is largely determined by the impact of your nutrition for your teeth. So in order to enhance that even further, and knowing that there were going to be people who wanted to ask even more questions specifically about teeth and the science behind it, I put together an additional booklet called Transcendent Teeth that's also available at my website in the health section. So the purpose of that booklet, for people who were wondering, like, why did you write an extra booklet? Well, I knew that some people were going to want to know exactly what the science was behind regeneration. So I didn't have time to do that in the health book proper. But what I did in Transcendent Teeth is I gave you the studies so that you can see exactly what the studies showed for specific nutrients. And then there's additional links to back up some of the nutritional points that I set up in the intro to review all of that so that you can go and verify all that information for yourself. So after we take care of big pharma, we have education, big education. So our mind control begins with the educational system. So we have to, how do we get rid of that? Well, we have to opt out of it. So I know that Stu Peters on one of his shows was saying, well, why should we leave? Why should we pull our kids out of the school? We should fight for the school boards and stuff like that. Well, it's difficult when elections for school boards are rigged. And the other point that I would say in relation to like current events, I know some people were talking, for example, about dismantling education at the federal level and letting states have their own ability to go back to doing what they want to do. But even if we get rid of, I don't know, drag queen story hour or whatever they're doing in the schools and all the pornography that's being exposed in grade school and stuff like that, and we go back to where we were, are we really in the best place? Do the statistics show that our literacy and our mathematical skills are tremendously high and have been high for many, many decades? No, they do not. There has been what's called the deliberate dumbing down of America. There's actually a book with that name. Farrell has a book called Rotten to the Common Core. You see the history of people like John Dewey, who was involved in education for a very long period of time, and his understanding of the human being was pretty corrupt and bizarre. A lot of people had a Pavlovian understanding of education, that all you have to do is give them a stimulus and people will respond the appropriate way, and that's the ultimate goal of education. Well, if that's the ultimate goal of education, I don't want to see education go back to that. I want to see it be better. So
Right.
how do you optimally out-design that? Well, my solution is at my website. So in the science section, there's a sketch called Optimal Education. It's a free article. It shows topics that would be discussed from grade school all the way through 12th grade. And in relation to textbooks for that, I actually have a bunch of textbooks all ready to go. So a recent edition, Vital Vocabulary. I put that at my website as a little mini booklet, gives you more than 100 root words to help you dissect words back to their etymology and derivation, makes you more powerful with language. Of course, for math, I have the Math Wizard. And I would just say on the Math Wizard isn't just like, boring, deep technical math. It shows you how to do basic math more easily than you've ever thought it could possibly be done. But in addition to that, it shows the practical applications of math to real life and realizing goals like freedom. So, for example, let's talk about a house. Okay, so if you want to build your own house and you want to have a foundation for that house that helps the house stay up, right? You would need to do some math for the foundation of that house. And I introduced that math in the Math Wizard. All right, now let's say you want to put a roof over your house. Well, you calculate stresses in what are called roof trusses. And if you want to build a bridge, you have a bridge truss. Now, how do you make sure that the roof truss can handle the stress or the bridge truss can handle the stress? Well, you use math for that. And I show you that math in the Math Wizard. So that's what I'm doing in the Math Wizard, is giving you not only easier ways to do fundamental math, but you learn things like mechanics. I sometimes call the Lohr equation, the simple equation of mechanical advantage. This is what you use for the 6 simple machines. And then, of course, from the 6 simple machines, you have the compound machines, which combine the simple machines. So, like, for example, a drill can be a combination of a screw and a gear. So you learn these skills to empower yourself in the direction of freedom. And I believe that ultimately, if we're going to improve the educational system, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the goal? So the goal for many people is to get a high-paying job. Well, that's not the goal that my educational system would be oriented toward. My goal would be to orient education towards an independent homestead, so that when you graduate from 12th grade, you know exactly how to go out, get land, build your own house, make it work in harmony with nature, and you are free for life. You can now do whatever you love to do all the rest of your days. So that to me is an optimal educational system. And again, everything has to be based on what I call a pro-world model. So in my fiction, I make a distinction between the pro-world and the con world. The pro-world consists of those who want to work with nature. The con world consists of those who want to work against nature. And most everything that we're being taught is to work against nature, that you should conquer nature, beat it, defeat it. I sometimes equate this to trying to defeat your own mother when you're an infant. It's a stupid path, and it's going to always lead to failure. So in any case, the optimal educational system would be along these lines. And I don't just support my own textbooks. There are many other excellent textbooks out there. Some of the ones are, The New Way Things Work by David McCulley. It's an excellent book for machines and how to work with machines. There's books in engineering like Structures or Why Things Don't Fall Down by Gordon. I'm not an engineer, but I've learned from people who were engineers. Donald Norman, The Design of Everyday Things. Daniel Brandt, Metallurgy Fundamentals. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different basic books that you can learn to empower yourself so that you don't have to waste your money on loans or parasitic insurance companies. And all of that stuff further defeats the cabal. So that would be step 2.
Right on. And you mentioned how talking heads say things like we have to rebuild it or we have to take it back and build back better. All these things of taking something that's already existing and reforming or rebuilding it, which we know if it's built on a shitty foundation, it's always going to come crumbling down no matter how you rebuild it. So I like what you said, that we have to fundamentally rethink these systems and start from the ground up.
Absolutely. And again, I think that the pro-world versus con-world model is the heart of it. I mean, we have to learn to work with nature, and I will be returning to that concept when I get to the government part. So part 3, we're controlled as kids through the educational system. We're controlled as adults through big media. And how do we stop big media? Well, we're doing it. We're doing it right now. I mean, we've seen this proof of the effectiveness of this strategy during the last several years. MSM is plummeting. I mean, its ratings are all-time low. Why are we having this conversation right now? Because podcasts have surged in popularity. People are no longer as interested in the MSM as they were. As the legacy media falters because people were sick of being lied to, they move away to alternative sources of information. Now, how would you optimally outdesign that? I don't have a solution ready to go for that right now, but I can describe to you what it would be like. It would be a pro-world model. So in relation to the news, one of the things that we see are, first of all, the presentation of dubious data. So these could be studies, polls. Like, for example, during the last presidential election, polls kept saying that Trump and Kamala Harris were dead even. Now, I don't want to comment on the merits of either candidate, but there's like no poll in the world that would have possibly shown they were dead even.
Right.
We know those polls were faked. The Trump was way ahead. Okay. So when you do studies and when you collect data, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. So there's a book on this called Tainted Truth by Cynthia Crossan. So examples of some of the things that can go on in relation to studies. So I mentioned my work in health. So one of the things that happens in health is that there are natural approaches and there are drug approaches. And how are statistics manipulated there? They're manipulated very easily. So one of the things you learn about working with nature is that nature tends to work relatively slowly. When you work with drugs, drugs tend to work very rapidly. So what will happen with statistics there? Someone uses a natural method, and let's say they just get started on a natural method. 24 hours later, they're dead. Okay, now this would be after, I don't know, 7 years of working with allopathic drugs, and they start one day on the natural method, they're dead. And of course, what does the medical community do? Oh, natural methods don't work. I mean, look at that. We've just proven that. Now, meanwhile, they were the person who killed the guy in the first place with all the drugs they put into him. And as I said, nature tends to work slowly. You have to give it a little bit of time to work. Now, what happens with the drugs? So somebody takes drugs for a while and they die. And then what do the community say? The exact opposite. Oh, well, the drugs didn't have enough time to work. Well, the drugs work rapidly, though. So why didn't they work rapidly in that case? So this is how statistics can be manipulated, leading to Mark Twain's famous joke: there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. So you have to be aware of that. And that when you're offering news to the people, you have to respect how the data is put together. In a poll, polls can be put together the right way, they can put together the wrong way. When they're put together the right way, then they're valid and useful. And when they're put together the wrong way, they're meaningless. And what we've seen also with the news, so many times when people talk about the news, they talk about objective. We want to be objective. We want to present both sides. But there's more to it than that. When I think back to a time period where I was watching Fox News for a while, one of the things that just was an eyebrow raiser for me is the number of stories on flags that fell down. So there'd be a flag that fell down, and Joe Bob went out in the rain and he picked up the flag and he stood it upright. Now we're going to have a long interview with Joe Bob. And I was like, okay. So, then we have 10-minute story about how Joe, got outside and got his feet wet and stuff and put the flag back up. Well,
Right.
You've just used up 10, 15 minutes of news time. Now, when I look back over the last several decades, and I look back on a book like Suppressed Inventions and Other Discoveries by Jonathan Eisen, that has a bunch of vital information that people still don't have to this day. So what you choose to view as news and put on the air is a form of showing your soul, your principles. Okay, what information do you think is newsworthy? I mean, there's so many things that have happened that were of tremendous newsworthy value. I mean, why wasn't David Martin's testimony all over the place on the news during the last several years? He had more valid information than almost anybody. Or Dr. Brian Artist, who was talking about the snake venom in the water supply. These people could have been on mainstream news, but they weren't. So it's not just a question of being objective. It's what is the soul of your news network? Are you trying to work in harmony with nature? Are you presenting the public with the best possible information, or are you not? So if there ever is to be a worthy news outlet of some kind, it would have to be on this pro-world basis of working with nature and not working against it, and reporting the news accordingly.
And I already see people starting to work towards this ideology, this pro-world ideology, even without being aware of it. If you're already becoming aware of some of the fundamental problems and you are participating with some of the information coming out of the alternative viewpoints, then you're already starting to adopt that a bit without even realizing it. And I know many people who are applying this to their business models, to what they're doing with their production, their media companies and things of that nature. So it's already starting, and I think it's kind of like a 100th monkey effect.
Exactly. And that's largely what we need, because we don't need everyone on planet Earth to be in this space I sometimes call the rebel space. We don't have to have everyone on Earth be that way. But if we have a significant enough number of us in that space, we can trigger that 100th monkey effect. So in relation to big media, the next target is big business. And what we saw with big media is the impact on big business. So, for example, when we pulled away from the MSM was sponsored by big business, brought to you by Pfizer is the ongoing joke. So when we pulled away from that, we got rid of the effectiveness of the advertising for all of those companies. And we can continue to do that. We've seen what's happened during the last several years in a multitude of situations. There was the famous Budweiser situation. There was the Target situation. There are any number of products that have come on the market now. I've talked a lot for example, in previous podcasts about how when you go to buy food, go look underneath the list of ingredients and look for the phrase contains a bioengineered ingredient. If you see that, don't buy that product.
Right.
And if enough of us do that, we have the impact to change the industry. I know that there's a fairly popular rebel out there, as I would call her, Food Babe. She's applied a great deal of corporate pressure to get rid of some of the artificial colors and stuff like that. And her pressure was eventually effective with that. Getting the information out there, finding out what products are truly good and truly bad. You can also do an analysis of stockholders. For example, who is the primary stockholder in the companies that you're patronizing? Is it BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all the rest of them? And if you see it's a Cabal-owned company, then try not to patronize it as best as possible. And I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not talking about agonizing and, going through your days laden with guilt or something like that. I'm talking about just doing the best you can. When you're going out and buying products, think as much as you can. Is this truly a positive product? Is it having a positive impact on the environment and the world? And as much as you can, support the products that are the healthiest, and it will be the downfall because you can do, as we see, I sometimes refer to it as the three Ps: pickets, protests, and petitions. You can do those, but they're not never as effective as withdrawing your money from buying their products because if their products are not selling, they collapse. Okay, so we have the power to do that. We have the power to create markets and to redefine them. As for optimally out to designing them, unfortunately, this is the toughest one of all. But when you see, we opened with a discussion of AI. Well, AI is going to be the nightmare of business and of the world in technology, mainly because of these data centers. I mean, these data centers are going to be the epitome of a gigantic technological parasite. I mean, so it's not just biological parasites we have to be concerned about, but technological parasites. And what do I mean by parasites? I mean the power grid. I mean, the amount of energy it takes to run these things is insane, and it's going to rip into every city's grid. There is a woman out there who's been offering her testimony on this. I mean, it just cripples the power in any location where it shows up. So several people have fended off having data centers put into their local areas, but the premise behind this is totally nuts. I mean, to say that you want to have data on every blade of grass on the planet, every tree, every human being being a power source, generating data on their own internal organs and sending that to a data center, like when you're having sex, when you're peeing. I mean, someone needs to know that information. They have to have that much invasion of privacy. There was that line in the Captain America Winter Soldier movie. This isn't progress, this is fear. Okay, this is fear. And the whole point here goes back to a statement in relation to why are you doing this in the first place? Okay, so with the scamdemic, we saw the EUAs, okay, emergency use authorization. And what was the premise behind that? That there were no other alternatives. There were no other solutions available. And what do we know? That there were other solutions that were available. So in relation to all this stuff that you're about to hear in, from now through the next several years in relation to AI, we have to do this so that we can get rid of war. We have to invade your body with cancer tech vaccines in order to prevent you from getting cancer. There is another way of doing it. There's solutions that work with nature and you will get rid of all these problems. This actually leads me to part 5, which is big religion. Okay, so I think that we do have to be concerned about big religion. Now, I know that my views on religion are probably not super popular, but if you go through hidden history of humanity and you look back to what religion has done, when you look at the Crusades, when you look at World War II, when you look at people fighting each other in the name of God, when you look at the child sexual abuse, you're going to watch movies like Spotlight to talk about the child sexual abuse that has gone on in the church for a very long period of time. When you look at the migration replacement, which has destroyed one nation after another, it's in the process of destroying multiple nations on the planet right now. Who aided and abetted most of that? That was the religious organizations. They made sure that those migrants came in. And as people keep talking about climate change, by the way, I just have to throw this in there. Why is the migration replacement getting started in the first place? Why are these people leaving their countries in the first place? We keep hearing climate change, climate change, climate change. The thing that I never hear on the news, the World Bank and the IMF, they are the ones who orchestrated all this. Investment firms that viewed Africa and Asia as nothing more than plunder, to go in there and rip and steal all their resources away, and they ruined those countries. They are the ones who were responsible for all these people wanting to leave their home. Bill, as many people have pointed out, Bill Gates could have, used his money in any number of intelligent ways. He could have improved the water. He could have had rock dust grown foods that make these people healthy and free. And he never did that. He was always creating a model of dependency. So when you're trying to understand cabal mentality, I would say not just the 2 questions, but the 3 questions. So the first classic question, when you see something going on, who benefits? So ask yourself in the background, who's going to benefit from the solution that's going to be proposed to this problem? Step 2, follow the money. They always say that. When you're trying to understand why is this plan being implemented, where does the money trace back to it? But the third question I would say is this going to lead to more centralization of power, or is it going to lead to decentralization of power? Because if it's going to lead to more centralization of power, you might as well be suspicious that something's wrong. And with religion, I'm just going to ask you this because I don't know if you've covered this or not. Have you heard about the Noahide laws and
Yes.
what's coming in relation to that? Okay, so what can you just in case I don't know someone's listening to this and they didn't catch a show that you did on the Noahide laws? What can you tell
Well,
us
I
about
haven't
what
done
you
a
learned?
show on it, but from what I understand, it's adopting these Judaic ideologies to implement on the global society.
Yes, and it can be so intense that, okay, let me mention this too. So some people have been aware of corruption in the church, and I will see that a number of people will say something like, "Oh, well, I agree with you that there's a lot of corruption in the church, but I'm into the Bible." And then I say to them, "Okay, well, wait a minute, hold on a second. Where is the Bible coming from? The Bible is coming from the people who run the church." And a lot of people don't realize how much manipulation there really has been. And this manipulation goes all the way back to ancient times. So, in order to back up what I'm saying, previously I mentioned one website, the Nazareans.com website, to get some insight into some of the stories in relation to Yeshua. But there are other websites out there that I'll mention. One of them is mythicism.net. I didn't suddenly develop a list. It's mythicism.net, which will get into the origins of several religions. And there's another website called bibleorigins.net. So if you go there, you will see some of the original Sumerian writings from which the original books of the Bible were put together. And some of the information in there is quite shocking. Just a quick example. The Sabbath. You know, you've been told from these ancient religions, keep holy the Sabbath. And what was the true origin of the Sabbath? It was all the dead people after Noah's flood. So the Anunnaki were disgusted with humans, thought they were making too much noise, couldn't wait to kill them off. And when they finally killed them off and there was quiet, they said, this should be a holy day. And there is the origin of the Sabbath. So, I mean, these are parts of what went into forming the Bible, and it never stopped. People may say, okay, well, wait a minute. Some of these changes, they only took place in ancient times. We haven't been doctoring the Bible this whole time. Yes, we have. I mean, it goes all the way up to the 20th century. So in the 20th century, for example, early in the 1900s, they had a line change in the Bible where the original text said, I am a jealous God. And this was changed into, I am a kind and loving God, because they thought that would go over better.
Yeah.
And so they continue to do things. And if these Noahide laws reach their peak, this is what we could be looking at in relation to these ancient religions that started all the way back in, the times of Sumer, Babylon, all the way up to the present. What if you were told that you not only have to worship a specific God, but where and when and how you're going to worship this God? And if you do not, you will get beheaded. Does that sound like a benevolent religion that you want to be a part of? So, I mean, people will have to think about this, because the goal of the Cabal this whole time has been to introduce one world religion eventually. And they will try to, it looks like, try to push for this through the Noahide laws. And in the background of this religion, the true nature of it is devil worship. I mean, this has always been their favorite religion of devil worship. And it sounds like extremes. And I know sometimes because people might not be familiar with my work. They hear me mention devil worship and they think, okay, so then you're like very strongly into the organized religions because you're mentioning the devil. No, I'm not. I mean, I'm just telling you that if you study the Cabal long enough, you see clearly they love the devil.
Yeah.
And my optimal out design for this is actually along the lines of the Math Wizard, which has a 7-step path to enlightenment where you grow closer to nature. What if we look at studying the creator through creation? So getting closer to minerals, to plants, to animals. So that way we start becoming closer to the creator. We develop our own individual spirituality where we don't need to consult an organized religion to know God. We consult creation itself and we look within. I thought I would just toss this in here as part of the introspective process, because it's probably not going to benefit everybody, but like maybe 1 in 100 listeners, this might be of benefit to. There are mystical abilities that we all have, and most of us don't tap into them. And for whoever this may benefit, I will tell you a strategy that you can use to start tapping your own mystical powers. I call it astrokinetics. So this worked for me fairly well. And this is to trigger out-of-body experiences. I suggest you always be a very positive person when you try to do this kind of thing. So what you do at night, right before you're about to go to sleep, when your brain waves are dropping in frequency, you can engage in this process of astrokinetics. So when your body's lying very, very, very still, I want you to imagine doing jumping jacks. but vividly imagine doing jumping jacks. Don't move your arms. Don't move your physical body in any way, but move the energy of your life force as if you're doing jumping jacks. So if you do this consistently enough, you will eventually trigger what I call the ghost waves. This is a vibration that starts in the brain and is a precursor to an out-of-body experience. And if you do that, you can separate your soul from your body and you can project yourself to where you want to go. So before you even trigger the ghost waves, have an idea where you want to go. Maybe you want to have a chat or with an advanced spiritual being, or you just want to go somewhere and have a certain type of positive experience. Focus on that and start tapping into your ability, and you'll realize that these are things that we could have been taught and probably were taught in the original Atlantean seven-step path to enlightenment, because I strongly believe that they were triggering out-of-body experiences routinely back then for the highest level adepts. And you can start knowing God as an individual, instead of consulting some external authority who has to tell you, get on your knees now. I mean, a lot of people may not be aware that Islam has an etymology, which means I surrender. I mean, is that really the way that you want to look at life in terms of surrender, submission, constantly being on your knees? And if these people are such experts on God, why are they not giving us? Why are they giving to us? Why are they constantly taking from us? Why do they constantly have to ask for donations? If you can associate with people in a belief system where everyone can share without one group constantly demanding things from another group, that seems a lot healthier to me. Because as I point out in Hidden History of Humanity, who is one of the largest landholders on the planet? Religion. And why do people need freedom so badly? Because they don't have land. So if we can take control of our land and be free of big religion and go on a spiritual path along the lines of the Math Wizard and the seven-step path to enlightenment, I believe that would be the optimal out design for that. So I will wrap up with big government, unless you have any questions or comments.
I just agree with you. I think dogma is the destroyer of worlds. I think there's something very dark behind most of our religious belief systems, especially the Abrahamic religions. And I'm not saying that God is evil. I just think that what we've been shown to be God is not the ultimate source, benevolent being, the real quote unquote God. And I think we've been deceived through religions. And I think what's happening now, and what more and more people like yourself, like myself, are becoming aware of, is that we need to stop relying on these outside quote unquote intelligences and angels and beings and politicians and global leaders and quote unquote experts to tell us how to live our lives, how to worship, how to eat, how to breathe, and become self-sufficient and just know how to do these things on our own.
So this brings me to a very important point. So with Christianity, sometimes when I see a lot of zealous Christians, I am tempted to just go back and double check some of my own sources on things. So I was looking at the Gospel of Mark, and one of the things that's in there is repent. I mean, and I hear this idea constantly up to the present day. There's a whole bunch of people right now running around saying, repent, repent, repent. Get rid of your sins and get yourself right with God and stuff like that. But one of the more interesting things looking back over the history is, what is our goal? Is our goal to have an ideal society of human beings? And if it is, who's come closest? Has there ever been a collection of religious people who all got along extremely well with each other and created a utopian society? And if we ask ourselves that question, who has gotten closest to the ideals that we all dream about? I find it very interesting that when we look, we do actually find answers for that question. And the first place that we're going to find answers is Weston Price's epical book, 1939, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Because what he showed in that book were very rare, but there were ideal societies in different places. They were isolated villages. One was in the Swiss Alps. Okay, so what happened in the Swiss Alps? All these people were healthy. They were eating healthy, natural foods. They were in isolation. They were happy farmers. They had no criminal justice system. They had no need of one. This is also true in several other places, including the Inuit, formerly the Eskimo. No criminal justice system, no need of one. And then can we translate that all the way up to the present day? Yes, we can. Because as I mentioned in Natural Healing Self-Empowerment, look up, if you can, the Appleton, Wisconsin school study that had every negative behavior that you can think of in an urban setting: truancy, violence, teen pregnancy, all suicide, all of it, depression. They changed the environment, got rid of all the junk food, put in healthy food, put in healthy lighting, and I talk a lot about lighting in the work of John Ott in my work. Lighting influences health and both physical and mental. All the negative behavior vanished. So there we go. We just transformed a completely negative environment into a positive one. Do you want to pay attention to information like that, or do you want to ignore it in favor of religion? And the UK prison study was similar to this. This is where they introduced healthy nutrition to a criminal environment that was in a prison. And the recidivism rate dropped 26%. Then they didn't even know everything about nutrition that I know. So who knows what would happen with that? The point being that if we want that optimal society, it's about reforming the environment. And if you can repent all you like, but the point is, why do you sin in the first place? Isn't it most of the time because the environment is so negative? If you're living in a positive environment where all your animal needs are met, and I talk about the 10 basics all the time, and I'll talk about them right here: water, sanitation, food, shelter, power, heating, cooling, lighting, telecommunication, and transportation. If all of those are optimized in your environment, you're probably not going to sin in the first place. So it's less important to repent than it is to build an optimal environment where people are just going to naturally behave well. Our default behavior is actually positive. That's why the cabal always tries to lure us with positive things. Like, for example, during the scamdemic, it was, well, you may want to do this for yourself, but what about hurting your grandmother? I mean, if we were evil people, they wouldn't be talking to us like that. But because we're compassionate, they talk to us in that way. So we can develop our positive nature as much as possible if we move in that direction. So that brings us finally to big government. So how do we opt out of big government? The first aspect of opting out of big government is don't fund them. Okay, so how do you not fund them? Well, there are three things that, I don't know, maybe only a few people participate in this, but they're called treasury bills, treasury notes, and treasury bonds, where people buy stock in the government in the hopes of getting a payoff later. Don't do that. So you can decrease your tax liability. So how do you do that? You can look up places like Freedom Tax Law. It's a website. Minimize your tax liability so you're not giving them as much money, and then don't participate. So in relation to war, I have no idea about exactly what's going to happen here in relation to war in the future, but I'm definitely concerned about the moves of Israel and the demonizing of Iran. I have a special perspective on that because of Hidden History of Humanity, because in Hidden History of Humanity, I talk about the primary Atlantean legacy sites that existed in the Middle East, and they were actually, guess where? In Palestine and in Iran. And isn't it interesting that these people are, now being slated to be wiped off the earth, and Palestine has already suffered a great deal. Etymologically, you can take Palestine back to Philistine from the Greek, and you can look at the Philistines as Atlantean legacies that came over from Crete and several other places. And it seems as if this agenda from ancient times is about exterminating our group of humanity. The sentiment of Reagan, I can't help but think that if an alien force were here, we would all unite. Well, guess what? That's been here the whole time, and we're still not united. But they are against us. White, black, brown, yellow. There's a group of people, a Homosaurian line, I would call it, that is the only one that didn't have a vaccine introduced into its population. So why is that? Why did 23andMe and Ancestry and all the rest of those people collect that data, supposedly with an agenda of creating vaccines that would wipe out specific genetics? So when you have this understanding and you look at the weather warfare, we've seen what happened in North Carolina. We saw what happened in Lahaina. We saw what happened recently in LA. Do you really think the government is out to help you, or is it out to kill you? And if you genuinely believe that it's out to kill you, for those people who say, well, I want to serve my country, well, this is where the pro-world model of optimal out-design has to step to the fore. We have to ask ourselves the fundamental questions. Are the 10 basics of civilization being met with optimal efficiency? Is our water ideal? Is our sanitation ideal? Is our food ideal? If none of these things are ideal, then your government isn't ideal, and you're not going to serve your country by going to kill on behalf of people who don't want you healthy. And eventually, the developers are going to have to be involved in this in a homestead model. So I want to talk about this in relation to government. So one of the more neglected of the founding fathers is John Dickinson. Now, his words on freedom are some of the most important ever uttered. So when we think about freedom in the United States, we talk about the U.S. Constitution and we talk about the Bill of Rights. So let's take a quick look at those for a second. So we have the preamble to the Constitution, which most people know, but it quickly leads to Article 1. And what do we get in Article 1 after this long speech about securing the freedom to the world? Taxation. They can't wait to tax you. It's right in Article 1. Okay, so what happened to all this talk about freedom? Just suddenly disappeared. And then some people will say, okay, well, wait a minute. I guess I can amend that. Maybe the Constitution isn't the real champion of freedom. It's the Bill of Rights. It's the Bill of Rights is the wonderful thing. Because in Article number 1, the very first one, you have these 5 freedoms that were guaranteed. Well, okay, how important are those freedoms? We've seen what's happened during the scamdemic. We saw freedom of religion. Well, you weren't allowed to gather at religious gatherings. Freedom of assembly. Well, you weren't allowed to gather and assemble when you wanted to. They would disperse you and, arrest you if you weren't following procedures when you were trying to assemble. Petition the government. Well, you got banned off social media. You just got kicked right out. Freedom of speech. Oh, wow. I mean, so many people could make comments about the limitations on free speech that we've seen. So what did John Dickinson say about freedom? He said the following: we cannot be happy if we are not free. We cannot be free unless we are secure in our property. We cannot be secure in our property if, without our consent, others may take it away. So in our country, we have the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, and it is right there that I would insert the needle scratching across the record sound and stop and say, no, no. To secure those rights, it shouldn't be that governments are instituted among men. It should be that homesteads are instituted among men, so that everyone has the right to their own property and no one can take it away from them. Because if you have that freedom, then you're free from the workplace tyranny, because you can always go to your home, grow your own food, and you're all set. Okay. Yeah. You have your own independent water supply. And yes, that can be done. I have specific ways that can be done. And eventually we can create economies that are free. The ultimate way to be rid of big business, we've seen these $500 billion investments supposedly coming up for AI. So if we invested that money instead in the direction of plasma physics, we would eventually complete a progression that's gone on since ancient times. This is the progression from arts and crafts to mills, which were driven, let's say, by rivers and water wheels, to factories where you have the beginnings of electricity in the production of a facility, to robotics, to CNC machines, computerized numerical control machines, to 3D printers, to ultimately, I believe it will hit a Simultron. A Simultron is a device I posit in my fiction, uses plasma. Now, plasma you can obtain from water, and if you hit plasma with the right vibration, I believe you can create a 3D model, a hologram of what you want to exist, project the hologram into the plasma mist, fuse the plasma into the hologram, and manifest the matter that you want. So this would be economy where the means of production are finally in the hands of the individual. I mean, classically, the debate was, do we have the means of production in the hands of the government or the corporations? What if it was in the hands of the individual who had their own little facility, maybe next to their garage, where they could manifest whatever project they want? If we invest in that direction, in plasma physics, that's how we would get to that point, and we could be free at last. But if we're ultimately going to optimally outdesign government, I would suggest the following. I would suggest, I had to invent these words, so bear with me a second. Naturators and a Vitorium. So I know that a lot of times people present me with false choices. You have to do this or that. So it's either big government and the rule of law, which is not the rule of the jungle, clarifies George Bush, or you have total anarchy. Well, anarchy, I know there's people who are on the anarchy bandwagon right now. You have James Corbett, you have Mike Adams. I would suggest something between the two, the naturators and the Vitorium. And what the naturators would be experts who are skilled in coordinating the relationship of a society to nature. So you have to provide water for your society, right? Do that in coordination with nature. Work with nature, don't work against it. And do the same thing with sanitation, food, and all the rest of them. Then the Vitorium is a place where you keep statistics with your focus constantly on life. Primarily 3 aspects of life: infant mortality, morbidity, and lifespan. In relation to the 10 basics of civilization, how are you meeting these needs in such a way as to optimize all human life? You have a building which has expertise in all the 10 basics of civilization how an independent homestead can meet all the 10 basics of civilization and do so in such a way that life is promoted. So with big government, they have these classic three distractions. You'll see them in every political debate, and everyone somehow thinks this is original, but whatever. You have jobs, taxes, and wars. So you have a political debate, say, what are you going to do about jobs? And then they have blah, 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 blah. What are you going to do about taxes? Blah, 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 blah. Switching gears, and you're not switching gears at all because you're stuck in reverse in all cases. But what are you going to do about the wars? And the answer to those questions, I can just give it to you right now. Get rid of all three of them. Because, I mean, none of them should exist. I mean, we shouldn't be doing mindless tasks for soulless corporations. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to meet the 10 basics of civilization and execute those tasks with great efficiency and skill and art and love and kindness and decency. If we do that, then we have a different model of government. Okay? And if we move in that direction, we would have a pro-world Vitorium instead of a government that is ruling by so-called rule of law. Because if the Cabal is running the government, then when they write the laws, those laws serve them. They do not serve us. So it's not this great triumph that we need to have all these laws in the first place. I believe we should not be governed by the rule of law, but guided by harmony with nature. And that would be what a Vitorium does.
100%. And one of the things that I'd add is something I did a while back is get as far away from a big city as possible. I'd still like to get more rural as far as where I'm living, but I think that that's a huge step for people to take is get out of any big cities. There's a huge move to further implement a mass surveillance state, especially with the moves this administration is making. A lot of people don't hear about it, but it's happening. I think the big cities is probably one of the worst places you can be if you're an aware person.
And we have to watch out for the strategy because the bad guys know that if we become independent and have homesteads that are outside the big cities, they have strategies waiting. And that's what these drones and a lot of these space-based weapons are for. You know, if you have a thriving community that is outside the big cities, they're going to try to burn you out.
Right.
They're going to try to start setting the fires. You were asking at the opening about some of the drones, and I was mentioning a little bit about the thermite stuff. So apparently some of these things, when you, for example, drop aluminum can trigger fires when it's pulsed with certain weapons and stuff like that. So basically they're seeding fires. It's like placing accelerants on the ground to burn people out of an area where they could be free. So I think in relation to the big weapons, which I know is a great fear that a number of people have, I'm not going to necessarily recommend that we focus on the big weapons and then trying to out-weapon the big weapons. I think it's much more effective to get to the heart of the matter, to reach out to our fellow human beings and say, is this really where you want to go? I mean, do you really want us all dead? Do you really want humans to no longer be human, to no longer have a soul just for the sake of running a little bit faster or thinking a little bit more quickly? And do you really not understand that the paradise that we've all sought is now possible if we just work with nature and use insights that we already have? There are only a handful of governments on the planet, you know, maybe Hungary, maybe El Salvador recently. Romania came close and then had it yanked away just like France did. But we're seeing what's happening now in the EU, where Germany is getting ready to pull out. That's the largest economy in the EU. If they pull out, that's going to be a big blow to the globalist plans. France is getting close. Britain had its Brexit. And I'm not saying that all these things are going to be 100% positive. I know in Canada's case, they may put in a WEF puppet in place once Trudeau's gone, whatever. All I'm saying is that the consciousness is changing. People are catching on that the farmers are rebelling. They want to get the food back. People want to have independent food supplies. But if we're going to get to this point, we do need somebody to finally get it, that this isn't going to work, that we're all going to die if we stay on the trajectory that we're on. Declare sovereignty, start working with nature, start building that example of a positive community, because as Thoreau says, as long as there's some goodness somewhere, that will leaven the whole lump. You know, so promote that pro-world model somewhere, you know, create some isolated sovereign community that is setting a better example, and that can impact the whole world. Till then, I'm just going to share the concepts of how to do it and see if anyone cares.
Right on. I love it. This is fantastic information. We're definitely going to have to dive back in and keep exploring some of these possibilities. Thank you again, Tim. Before we close out, remind the audience how they can find all your content.
So if you use the Google search engine for now, just type in the company name, Polytope Press. Polytope is Polytope space press. And you can find the links to all of my books, including Natural Healing, Self-Empowerment, Hidden History of Humanity, Math Wizard, and a lot more. And I do encourage people to visit. Let me know what they think. There's a lot of free material there, including articles and the recommended reading list. And you can learn a lot of things without spending any money if you like. And it is encouraging to me to hear from people that are making their lives better. So I do encourage you to communicate.
Awesome. Tim, thank you so much. Fantastic stuff. Like I said, we'll be doing it again soon. And until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will talk again on Monday. We'll see y'all then.